The clock on the wall showed 7:30 in the evening. Inside Romano's Italian restaurant, the dinner rush was just getting started. The place was packed with people who had money to spend and time to enjoy. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over the tables. The smell of garlic bread and rich tomato sauce filled the air, mixing with the sound of laughter and clinking wine glasses. This wasn't the kind of place where ordinary people came to eat. The prices on the menu could feed a family for a week. Men in expensive suits sat across from women wearing jewelry that probably cost more than a car. They talked about business deals and vacation homes, completely absorbed in their comfortable lives. In the corner of the restaurant sat a beautiful grand piano. Its black surface was so polished you could see your reflection in it. But nobody was playing it. The restaurant used to have a pianist who came every evening, an old man who knew every classic song by heart. But he had retired 2 months ago and the owner hadn't found a replacement yet. Now the piano just sat there silent and waiting like a sleeping giant. Outside on the cold street, a different world existed. The October wind cut through the air like a knife. People hurried past with their coats pulled tight, rushing home to their warm houses. They didn't notice the small figure standing near the restaurant's glass doors. Her name was Lily, and she was only 12 years old. But if you looked at her face, you might think she was older. Her eyes carried a sadness that children shouldn't know. Her clothes were 3 sizes too big, probably hand-me-downs from a donation center. The jacket she wore had a broken zipper, and her jeans were held up with a piece of rope instead of a belt. Her shoes, once white sneakers, were now gray and torn, with holes near the toes that let in every bit of cold from the pavement. She stood there shivering, not just from the cold but from fear and hunger. Her stomach had been empty for 2 days now. She'd tried the usual spots where restaurants threw out their leftover food, but someone else had gotten there first. The shelter she sometimes slept at was full tonight. She had nowhere to go and nothing to eat. Lily pressed her face against the glass door and looked inside. The warmth from the restaurant made the glass fog up with her breath. She watched the people eating, saw them laughing and enjoying their meals without a care in the world. A waiter walked by carrying a plate of spaghetti with meatballs, and her stomach twisted with such painful hunger that she had to close her eyes. 3 weeks. That's how long she'd been living on the streets. 3 weeks since she'd run away from her last foster home. It was her 4th one, and like all the others, it hadn't worked out. The foster parents weren't bad people, but they had 3 other kids to take care of. Lily was just another mouth to feed, another problem to deal with. When she asked if she could use their old keyboard in the basement to practice, they said no. When she tried anyway, they got angry and threatened to send her to a group home instead. Music was the only thing Lily had left of her mother. Everything else was gone. Her mom had died 8 months ago from cancer, and with her went the only home Lily had ever known. There was no other family, no grandmother or aunt to take her in. Just the foster care system and a series of houses that never felt like home. But before all of that, before the sickness and the hospitals and the funeral, there had been music. Lily's mother had been a music teacher, not a famous one, just someone who taught piano lessons from their small apartment. She'd started teaching Lily when she was 4 years old. Every day after school, they would sit together at their old upright piano, and her mother would guide her small fingers across the keys. Music tells the truth, her mother used to say. When you can't find the words, play what your heart feels. Even when money was tight and they had to choose between paying for electricity or buying groceries, her mother never sold that piano. It was their treasure, their joy, their way of talking to each other without words. Now that piano was gone, probably sold by the landlord to cover unpaid rent, her mother was gone. Everything was gone. Except the music that still lived inside Lily's head and heart. She looked through the glass door again and saw the piano in the corner. It was calling to her somehow, like it knew she needed it. An idea formed in her mind, crazy and desperate. What if she could play? What if they would let her perform just one song in exchange for food? It was worth a try. What did she have to lose? Her hand trembled as she reached for the door handle. The metal was cold against her palm. She pulled the door open and stepped inside. The change was immediate. Warm air wrapped around her like a blanket. The smell of food was so strong it made her dizzy. And suddenly everyone was looking at her. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The woman at the closest table actually gasped and pulled her purse closer, as if this dirty child might steal it. A man in a gray suit frowned and made a disapproving sound in his throat. The head waiter spotted her immediately. He was a tall, thin man with perfectly combed hair and a spotless black uniform. His name tag said Daniel, and his face showed exactly what he thought about a street kid walking into his fancy restaurant. He moved toward her quickly, his shoes clicking sharply on the marble floor. "Young lady, you can't be in here," he said in a voice that was trying to sound polite but really wasn't. "This is a private establishment." Lily's throat felt tight. She wanted to run back outside, to disappear into the cold night where at least nobody was staring at her. But the hunger in her belly gave her courage. "Please, sir," she said, and her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "I can play piano. I'm really good at it. If you let me play just one song, just one, all I'm asking for is a plate of food. Anything, I don't care what it is. I'm just so hungry." Daniel's expression didn't change. "I'm sorry, but we can't just let anyone—" "What's going on here?" A new voice interrupted, speaking with a thick Italian accent. An older man walked over from near the kitchen area. He was short and round, with gray hair and kind brown eyes that had deep wrinkles at the corners. This was Mr. Antonio, the restaurant owner. He'd opened this place 30 years ago with money he'd saved from working 3 jobs when he first came to America. Daniel turned to him. "Mr. Antonio, this child just wandered in off the street. I was just escorting her out." But Mr. Antonio wasn't looking at Daniel. He was looking at Lily, really looking at her. He saw the hunger in her eyes, yes, but he saw something else too. Something that reminded him of himself many years ago, when he was young and desperate and far from home. "She says she can play piano?" Mr. Antonio asked. "Yes, but sir, we can't just—" Mr. Antonio held up his hand, silencing the waiter. He took a step closer to Lily and bent down slightly so he could look her in the eyes. "You really play, little one? Or are you just saying this to get food?" Lily met his gaze. "I really play, sir. My mama taught me. She was a music teacher. I've been playing since I was 4 years old." Something in the way she said mama in the past tense made Mr. Antonio's heart hurt. He knew that kind of loss. He'd lost his own mother when he was young. He stood up straight and looked around at all the watching customers. Then he looked at the silent piano in the corner. Finally, he looked back at Lily. "Okay," he said simply. "You play for us, one song. Then we see about that food, yes?" Lily couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Really? You'll really let me?" "I give you my word, now go. Show us what you can do." Lily walked slowly toward the piano. Each step felt like it took forever. She could feel every single pair of eyes in the restaurant following her movement. Some people looked curious. Others looked annoyed, like she was interrupting their expensive evening. A few whispered to each other behind their hands. "Can you believe they're letting her touch that piano?" one woman muttered to her husband. "She probably doesn't even know how to play," someone else said quietly. Daniel, the waiter, stood near the kitchen with his arms crossed. He clearly thought this was a mistake. But Mr. Antonio had given his word, and in his restaurant his word was final. Lily reached the piano and stood there for a moment, just looking at it. It was the most beautiful instrument she'd ever seen. The black surface gleamed under the soft lights. She could see her own reflection in it. A thin girl with tangled hair and dirty clothes who looked like she didn't belong here. Maybe she didn't. Maybe this whole thing was a terrible idea. Her hands were shaking as she sat down on the piano bench. The leather was soft and comfortable, nothing like the hard wooden stool she used to sit on at home with her mother. She placed her worn-out sneakers on the pedals and felt how smooth they were under her feet. The piano keys were cool and clean under her fingertips. Back home, their old piano had keys that stuck sometimes. Some of the white keys had turned yellow with age, and a few didn't even make sound anymore. But this piano was perfect. Every key would work. Every note would ring out clear and true. Lily took a deep breath. Her stomach was doing nervous flips, and not just from hunger. What if she messed up? What if her fingers forgot what to do? She hadn't played a real piano in months, not since her mother died. What if she was too rusty? What if everyone laughed at her? She closed her eyes and thought about her mother. She could almost hear her voice, soft and encouraging. "Don't think about them, baby. Don't think about anything except the music. Let your heart speak through your fingers." Lily's hand stopped shaking. She positioned her fingers over the keys and began to play. The first note was soft, almost whisper quiet. It floated through the air like a butterfly. Then came another note and another. At first, she played carefully, testing the piano, getting to know it. The instrument responded beautifully to her touch, better than any piano she'd ever played. As her confidence grew, the music grew with it. She played a piece she had written herself during those long, lonely nights on the street. She'd never written it down on paper because she didn't have paper. She'd never played it out loud because she didn't have a piano. But it had been living inside her head all this time, waiting for this moment. The melody started sad and slow. It sounded like crying, but crying without tears. It was the sound of loss, of missing someone so much it hurt to breathe. Every note carried the weight of the nights she'd spent curled up in doorways, remembering her mother's smile. The way her mom used to hum while making breakfast. The way she laughed at silly jokes. The way she'd kiss Lily's forehead before bed and say, "Sweet dreams, my little musician." Around the restaurant, something strange was happening. The people who had been whispering and frowning were going quiet. The man in the gray suit who had made that disapproving sound earlier put down his fork and stopped eating. The woman who had clutched her purse was now clutching her napkin instead, pressing it against her mouth. In the kitchen, the cooks had stopped cooking. They stood in the doorway, watching this small girl play music that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than just her fingers. Even Daniel, the waiter who had wanted to throw her out, found himself frozen in place, unable to look away. Mr. Antonio stood near the kitchen entrance with tears already running down his round cheeks. This music reminded him of his own childhood in Italy, of his mother singing while she cooked, of the day he had to leave her behind to come to America for a better life. He hadn't seen her again before she died. This girl's music made him feel all of that old grief, fresh and raw like it had just happened yesterday. Lily's playing grew stronger, more intense. The sad melody transformed into something that sounded like anger. Sharp notes crashed down like fists pounding on a table. This part of the song was about all the unfair things in life. Why did good people get sick? Why did mothers have to die? Why did children end up alone and hungry on the streets? The music asked these questions that had no answers. A businessman at a corner table felt something crack open inside his chest. He'd been so focused on making money, on getting ahead, that he'd forgotten what really mattered. He'd missed his own daughter's piano recital last month because of a meeting. Listening to this girl play made him realize what a fool he'd been. At another table, an elderly couple held hands tightly. The music reminded them of their own struggles many years ago, when they were young and poor and didn't know if they'd make it. They'd survived and eventually thrived, but they'd forgotten what it felt like to be desperate. This child was reminding them. Lily kept playing, unaware of the effect she was having on everyone around her. She was lost in her own world now, in the music itself. Her small body swayed gently with the rhythm. Her eyes were still closed and tears were streaming down her dirty face, but she didn't notice. She was somewhere else entirely, somewhere the music was taking her. The angry part of the song softened. Now came something different, something that sounded almost like hope. It was fragile and uncertain, like the first flower pushing through snow in early spring. The notes climbed higher and higher, reaching for something better, something brighter. This part was about the morning sun that came after the darkest nights, about the kindness of strangers, like the woman at the shelter who had given her a blanket once, like the man at the grocery store who had pretended not to see her slip an apple into her pocket because he knew she was hungry. The music was saying that even when everything is terrible, even when you've lost everything, there are still tiny sparks of light in the darkness. You just have to keep looking for them. You just have to keep going. A young waitress named Beth stood near the bar with tears rolling down her face. She was working 3 jobs to pay for her own mother's medical bills. She was exhausted all the time, and some days she didn't know how she'd keep going. But this music, this brave little girl playing her heart out, made Beth feel less alone in her struggle. Mr. Antonio watched Lily play and made a decision in his heart. No matter what happened next, he wasn't going to let this child go back out onto those cold streets tonight. He didn't know how he'd help her yet, but he would find a way. Maybe his wife would know what to do. She was always better at figuring out these things. Lily's playing continued, building toward something. The melody became more complex, weaving different themes together, the sadness, the anger, the hope, all mixing and dancing with each other like colors swirling in water. Her fingers flew across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for someone so young, someone who'd been living on the streets, someone who hadn't touched a piano in months. But that's the thing about real talent, real passion. It doesn't go away just because life gets hard. It stays inside, waiting for its chance to come out. The music filled every corner of the restaurant. It went into the spaces between words, between thoughts, between heartbeats. It reminded every person there that underneath their expensive clothes and full bellies, they were just human beings capable of feeling pain and joy and everything in between. Some people cried openly now, not even trying to hide it. Others sat very still, afraid that moving might break the spell. Even the people walking by outside on the street stopped when they heard the music drifting through the glass doors. They pressed their faces against the window, trying to see where such beautiful playing was coming from. And still Lily played on, pouring every ounce of her young soul into this one song, this one chance to be heard, to matter, to turn her music into the meal she so desperately needed. The music was reaching its peak now. Lily's fingers moved faster, pressing keys with more force, more urgency. The melody climbed higher and higher like someone climbing a mountain, struggling with every step but refusing to give up. This was the heart of her song, the part that said everything she'd been holding inside for months. She was playing about her mother now, really playing about her. Not just the sadness of losing her, but the beauty of having known her at all. The memories flooded through her fingers onto the keys. Summer afternoons when they'd eat ice cream and practice scales. Winter evenings when they'd play duets together. Her mother on the lower keys and Lily on the higher ones, their hands crossing over each other and laughing when they made mistakes. There was that one time when they were so broke, they had to eat plain rice for a whole week. But her mother had made it into a game, pretending they were astronauts eating space food on a mission to Mars. And after dinner, they'd played music together. And suddenly being poor didn't matter so much because they had each other and they had their piano. The song captured all of this. The joy and the pain, all mixed together the way life really is. You can't have one without the other. The happiness means something because you know what sadness feels like. The light is brighter because you've been in the dark. In the restaurant, grown men were wiping their eyes with the backs of their hands. Women were openly crying into their napkins. Even Daniel, the stiff waiter who never showed emotion, had to turn away because his eyes were getting wet and he didn't want anyone to see. A woman sitting near the window was crying so hard, her whole body shook. Her name was Helen, and she'd just come from the hospital where her own daughter was sick. The doctors said she'd be okay, but Helen had been so scared. Listening to this child play, knowing somehow that this girl had lost her mother, made Helen realize how precious every moment with her daughter really was. She pulled out her phone and sent a text message. "I love you so much. I'll be home soon." At the bar, a young man named Chris sat frozen with his drink halfway to his lips. He hadn't spoken to his mother in 3 years because of a stupid argument he couldn't even remember the details of anymore. Pride had kept him from picking up the phone. But listening to this music, hearing the love and loss in every note made him realize how foolish he'd been. Life was too short. People you loved could be gone tomorrow. He set down his drink and pulled out his phone to call his mom. Mr. Antonio was crying so hard he had to sit down at an empty table. His wife Rosa came out from the kitchen where she'd been overseeing the cooking. She saw her husband's tears and heard the music and immediately understood. She sat beside him and took his hand. And they listened together, both thinking about their own parents who'd passed away years ago. The music began to shift again. The climbing melody reached its highest point and then started to come down, but not in a sad way. It was more like someone reaching the top of that mountain and looking out at the view, seeing how far they'd come. There was peace in these notes, acceptance. The kind of acceptance that doesn't mean giving up, but rather finding the strength to keep going. This part of the song was about survival. About waking up every morning even when you didn't want to. About taking one more step even when your feet hurt. About finding beauty in small things like the way the sunrise looked between buildings, or how good cold water tasted when you were thirsty, or the kindness in a stranger's eyes. Lily was playing about the homeless man who'd shared his cardboard box with her one rainy night, even though he had almost nothing himself. About the librarian who'd let her sit inside for hours even though she knew Lily wasn't there to read books, just to be warm. About the baker who sometimes left day-old bread in a bag by the back door, where he knew she'd find it. The world could be cruel, her music said, but it could also be kind. People could hurt you, but they could also save you, and sometimes the smallest acts of kindness meant more than anyone knew. The melody became gentler now, like a lullaby. It reminded everyone listening of being a child, of feeling safe, of believing that everything would be okay. For a few minutes, every person in that restaurant was transported back to a simpler time, back to when their own mothers tucked them into bed, back to when the world felt manageable and love felt permanent. A police officer who'd stopped in for a quick dinner found himself thinking about all the homeless kids he'd seen on the streets over the years. He'd always done his job, moved them along when people complained, but he'd never really thought about their stories. Never wondered who they used to be before they ended up sleeping on sidewalks. This girl was giving him a glimpse into that world, and it was breaking his heart. The kitchen staff stood together in a cluster, watching through the doorway. There was Miguel, the head chef who'd immigrated from Mexico with dreams of opening his own restaurant someday. There was Patricia, the dishwasher, who sent most of her money back home to support her 3 kids. There was young Tommy, the prep cook, who was working his way through culinary school. They all understood struggle in their own ways, and this girl's music spoke to something deep inside each of them. Lily's playing became softer still. The notes were like raindrops now, gentle and falling one at a time. This was the ending she'd imagined during those long nights on the street. An ending that wasn't really an ending at all, but more like a door opening to something new. The music suggested that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow could be better than today. The final section of her song was the hardest part to play emotionally. It was about hope, but realistic hope, not the fairy tale kind where everything magically becomes perfect. The kind of hope that acknowledges life will still be hard, but you'll find a way through it, that you're stronger than you think, that you've survived every bad day so far, which means you're pretty tough when you think about it. Her mother used to tell her that. "You're tougher than you know, baby girl," she'd say while brushing Lily's hair before bed. "You've got steel in your spine and music in your soul. Nobody can take that away from you." Lily played those words into the piano. She played her mother's voice, her mother's love, her mother's belief in her, even though her mother was gone. Even though Lily was alone and hungry and scared most of the time, that love was still there. It lived in her memory. It lived in this music. It would live forever as long as Lily kept playing. The restaurant was completely silent except for the piano. Even the kitchen had gone quiet. The usual background noise of a busy restaurant, the clattering plates and murmured conversations and clinking glasses, had all stopped. There was only the music and the soft sound of people crying. Outside on the street, a small crowd had gathered. At least 20 people stood pressed against the glass, listening. Some were recording on their phones. Others just stood there with their hands over their hearts. A taxi driver had pulled over and left his cab running just to listen. A woman walking her dog had stopped moving, and her dog sat patiently beside her, as if even the animal understood something special was happening. Lily played the final notes of her song. They were quiet, peaceful, like a breath being released after holding it for too long. The last note hung in the air, vibrating through the space, touching every person there one final time. Then it faded away into silence. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. It was as if the entire restaurant was holding its breath, not wanting the moment to end. Lily lifted her hands from the keys. She opened her eyes and looked down at the piano, almost surprised to find herself there. She'd been so lost in the music that she'd forgotten where she was. Slowly, almost afraid of what she might see, she turned around on the bench to face the room. What Lily saw when she turned around made her freeze. Every single person in the restaurant was looking at her with tears streaming down their faces. The elegant woman in the pearl necklace, the businessman in the expensive suit, the young couple on a date, the elderly man dining alone, all of them crying. For a moment, Lily thought she'd done something wrong. Maybe she'd played too loudly. Maybe she'd bothered them. Maybe they were angry that a dirty street kid had touched their fancy piano. Her heart started to race with fear. Then someone started clapping. It was Mr. Antonio. He stood up from his table, his round face wet with tears, and brought his hands together. The sound echoed through the quiet restaurant. Then Rosa, his wife, stood up and started clapping too. Then Daniel, the waiter. Then the woman with the pearls. Then the businessman. Then everyone. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was on their feet, applauding. The sound was like thunder. People weren't just clapping politely the way they might at a concert. They were clapping hard, clapping with everything they had. Some were still crying while they clapped. Others were shouting, "Bravo!" and "Beautiful!" Lily sat on the piano bench completely stunned. She didn't know what to do with her hands. She didn't know where to look. Nobody had ever clapped for her like this before. When she'd played at her mother's student recitals, there had been polite applause, sure, but nothing like this. This was different. This felt like the whole room was trying to tell her something important. Mr. Antonio rushed forward, moving faster than a man his age should move. He reached Lily and pulled her up from the bench into a big hug. She was so surprised she almost pulled away. But something about his hug reminded her of her grandfather who'd died when she was little. It felt safe. It felt like family. Bellissima, he kept saying, which Lily didn't understand but knew was something good from the way he said it. That was the most beautiful thing I hear in my whole life. The most beautiful. He held her at arm's length and looked at her face, really looked at her. He saw the dirt on her cheeks mixed now with tears. He saw how thin she was. He saw the dark circles under her eyes from not sleeping well. He saw a child who needed help. "You wait right here," he said, and hurried toward the kitchen, calling out to his wife in rapid Italian. The other diners started approaching. A tall woman in a black dress came forward first. She had kind eyes and carried herself with confidence. Her name was Victoria, and she worked as a music producer in the city. "Sweetheart," she said, kneeling down so she was at Lily's eye level. "That was extraordinary. Truly extraordinary. I've been working in music for 25 years, and I've never heard anything quite like what you just played." "Did someone teach you that song?" Lily shook her head, her voice coming out small and shy. "No, ma'am. I made it up in my head. I've never played it before today." Victoria's eyes went wide. "You composed that just now? That entire piece?" When Lily nodded, Victoria sat back on her heels, stunned. "That's remarkable. You have a genuine gift." Other people gathered around now, careful not to overwhelm the girl, but wanting to say something. The businessman pressed a $20 bill into her hand. "That was the most moving thing I've ever heard," he said gruffly, trying to hide that he was still emotional. "Thank you." The elderly couple approached together, the wife holding her husband's arm. "You play just like our daughter used to play," the old woman said softly. "She passed away 5 years ago. Listening to you, it was like having her back for a few minutes. What a gift you gave us." A young mother with a baby in a stroller came up. "I'm going to tell my daughter about you someday," she said. "About the brave girl who made a whole restaurant cry with her beautiful music." More people came forward with money. $10. $5. One man gave her a 50. Lily's hands filled with cash, more money than she'd seen in months. She didn't know what to say. Thank you seemed too small for what was happening, but she said it anyway over and over. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Daniel, the waiter who'd wanted to throw her out earlier, approached with his head slightly bowed. "I owe you an apology, young lady. I judged you before I knew you. That was wrong of me." He pulled a business card from his pocket along with some folded bills. "My sister runs a shelter for kids downtown. If you ever need a safe place to stay, you call this number. Promise me." Lily took the card with shaking hands. "I promise." Beth, the young waitress who'd been crying, came over with a shopping bag. "I keep spare clothes in my locker for after work," she explained. "They'll be too big for you, but they're clean and warm. Please take them." Mr. Antonio returned from the kitchen with Rosa right behind him. Rosa was carrying a tray, and on it was the biggest plate of food Lily had ever seen. Spaghetti with meatballs, garlic bread, a side salad, and a huge slice of chocolate cake. The smell made Lily's empty stomach cramp with need. "You sit, you eat," Rosa said firmly, guiding Lily to a nearby empty table. "Eat slow, okay? Your stomach, it needs to adjust if you haven't eaten properly." Lily sat down and the plate was placed in front of her. For a moment she just stared at it. Real food, hot food, more food than she could possibly eat. Her hands trembled as she picked up the fork. The first bite of spaghetti was the best thing she'd ever tasted. The sauce was rich and perfectly seasoned. The pasta was cooked just right. She had to force herself to eat slowly like Rosa had said, even though she wanted to shove it all in her mouth at once. Around her, the restaurant slowly returned to normal. People went back to their tables, but the atmosphere had changed. There was less chatter, more thoughtfulness. Strangers at different tables were talking to each other about what they'd just witnessed. Victoria, the music producer, pulled up a chair next to Lily's table. She waited until the girl had eaten a bit before speaking. "Lily, is that your name?" When the girl nodded, she continued, "I want to help you. What you have, that talent, it's rare. Maybe once in a generation rare. But more than that, you're clearly in a difficult situation. How old are you?" 12, Lily said between bites of garlic bread. And where are your parents? Lily's face fell. My mom died. 8 months ago, cancer. I don't have a dad. Never did. It's just been me and Mom my whole life, and now it's just me. Victoria's professional expression cracked, showing the real emotion underneath. Where have you been living? Foster homes. 4 of them. But they didn't work out. So I've been on the street for a few weeks now. A few weeks? Victoria's voice rose slightly. A child your age has been homeless for weeks? She looked angry, but not at Lily. At the system that had failed this talented, precious child. Mr. Antonio had been listening from nearby. He came over and put his hand on Lily's shoulder. No more, he said firmly. No more streets. Tonight you come home with Rosa and me. We have a guest room. Tomorrow we figure out the rest. Lily looked up at him, afraid to believe it. Really, you'd let me stay with you? You think I let a child sleep on the street after what you just do for my restaurant? For all these people? He gestured around the room. You brought something special here tonight. Something nobody will forget. The least I can do is give you a warm bed and a safe place. Victoria nodded approvingly. That's generous of you. And I'm going to make some calls tomorrow. I know people at the Music Academy uptown. They have programs for gifted students, scholarships, sometimes even housing assistance. With your talent, I think we can find you a real opportunity. Lily's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were different from the sad tears she'd cried while playing. These were tears of relief, of hope, of not being alone anymore. Why are you all being so nice to me? She whispered. Mr. Antonio squeezed her shoulder gently. Because you reminded us of something we forgot. You reminded us what really matters. 3 months had passed since that night at Romano's restaurant. Lily still remembered every detail like it had happened yesterday. The warmth of the place, the smell of the food, the feeling of the piano keys under her fingers, the sound of all those people clapping for her. That night had changed everything. Mr. Antonio and Rosa had taken her home just like they promised. Their guest room was small but cozy, with a real bed that had clean sheets and a thick comforter. Lily had cried herself to sleep that first night, not from sadness but from relief. A real bed, a locked door, safety, things she'd thought she might never have again. The next morning, Rosa had made her a huge breakfast. Eggs, toast, fresh fruit, orange juice. Lily had eaten slowly, still not quite believing this was real. That these kind people weren't going to change their minds and send her away. But they didn't. Days turned into weeks, and Mr. Antonio and Rosa treated her like she was their own granddaughter. They bought her new clothes that actually fit. They took her to a doctor for a checkup. They made sure she had everything she needed. And most importantly, they made her feel safe. Victoria, the music producer, had kept her promise too. She'd made phone calls to everyone she knew in the music world. Within a week, she'd arranged for Lily to audition at the Riverside Academy of Music, one of the most respected music schools in the city. The audition had been terrifying. Lily had to play for a panel of 5 judges, all serious-looking people with clipboards. But she'd closed her eyes and played the same song she'd played at the restaurant, the one that came from her heart. When she finished, one of the judges, an older man with glasses, had wiped his eyes and said simply, "Welcome to Riverside." They'd offered her a full scholarship. Everything paid for, tuition, books, even a meal plan. More than that, they'd connected her with a foster family who specialized in taking in children with special talents. Her new foster mother, a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, was a retired music professor. She lived in a brownstone in a quiet neighborhood with a music room that had not 1 but 2 pianos. Dr. Chen was different from the other foster parents Lily had stayed with. She understood what music meant to Lily because she felt the same way about it herself. She didn't see Lily as a burden or a problem to solve. She saw her as a fellow musician, someone who spoke the same language she did. Music chose you, Dr. Chen had told her on the first day. That's a gift and a responsibility. We'll help you develop that gift together. Now, 3 months later, Lily was thriving in ways she'd never imagined possible. She attended classes at Riverside every day, learning music theory, composition, and performance technique from the best teachers in the city. She practiced for hours, not because anyone made her, but because she loved it. The more she learned, the more she wanted to learn. Her story had spread beyond that one restaurant. Someone who'd been there that night had posted a video on social media. It was just a short clip taken on a phone, but it captured enough of her playing to show people what they'd witnessed. The video had gone viral. Millions of people watched it. The comments were filled with people crying, sharing their own stories of loss and hope, thanking this young girl they'd never met for reminding them what really mattered. News stations had wanted to interview her. Record labels had called, but Victoria and Dr. Chen had protected her from all of that. "You're 12 years old," Dr. Chen had said firmly. "You need time to be a child, to learn, to grow. The fame can wait. Your childhood can't." Instead, they'd let Lily focus on her music and her healing. She saw a therapist once a week, someone who helped her process the loss of her mother and the trauma of living on the streets. It was hard work talking about painful things. But slowly, Lily was learning that it was okay to be sad sometimes, that missing her mother didn't mean she couldn't also be happy, that she could hold both things at once. Tonight was special, though. Tonight was her first real performance since that night at the restaurant. Riverside Academy was holding its winter recital at a small concert hall downtown, and Lily was one of the students performing. Mr. Antonio and Rosa had front row seats. Victoria was coming. Beth, the waitress from the restaurant, had taken the night off work to be there. Even Daniel, the waiter who'd almost thrown her out that night, was coming. Backstage, Lily stood in her new dress, a simple navy blue one that Dr. Chen had helped her pick out. Her hair was clean and brushed, pulled back with a clip. She looked like a different person from the hungry, dirty girl who'd walked into Romano's 3 months ago. But inside, she was still the same Lily. Still the girl who loved music more than anything. Still the girl who missed her mother every single day. Dr. Chen found her pacing nervously. "How are you feeling?" "Scared," Lily admitted. "What if I mess up? What if I forget the notes?" Dr. Chen smiled gently. "Then you'll recover and keep playing. That's what musicians do. But you won't forget. You know this piece inside and out. You've played it 100 times. What if people don't like it? Some will, some won't. That's art. You can't please everyone, and that's okay. You're not playing for them anyway. Remember what your mother taught you?" Lily nodded, remembering. "Play what your heart feels." "Exactly. Your heart knows what to do. Trust it." The stage manager called Lily's name. It was time. She walked out onto the stage, and the lights were so bright she could barely see the audience. But she could feel them there. All those people waiting to hear her play. She sat at the grand piano in the center of the stage and adjusted the bench. Then she saw them. In the front row, Mr. Antonio and Rosa holding hands. Mr. Antonio gave her a big thumbs up. Next to them, Victoria smiled encouragingly. Beth waved. And there, in the seat next to Beth, was something that made Lily's heart skip. Dr. Chen had placed a single white rose on an empty chair, a tribute to her mother, so she'd be there too in spirit. Lily felt something warm spread through her chest. She wasn't alone. She'd never be alone again. All these people cared about her, believed in her, wanted her to succeed. And somewhere, somehow, she felt like her mother was watching too, proud of how far her little girl had come. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The piece she'd chosen was a new composition, one she'd been working on at Riverside. It was called Tomorrow's Song, and it was about second chances, about how life can surprise you, about how the darkest moments can lead to the brightest new beginnings, about how one act of courage, one moment of asking for help can change everything. The music flowed from her fingers, confident and sure. She wasn't playing for fame or recognition. She wasn't even playing for the scholarship or the opportunities that had come her way. She was playing because this was who she was. A musician, a survivor, a girl who'd been knocked down but got back up. As she played, Lily thought about that night at the restaurant. How hungry and scared she'd been. How close she'd come to giving up completely. If Mr. Antonio hadn't said yes, if he'd let Daniel throw her out like he'd wanted to, if she hadn't found the courage to ask for that one chance. But she had asked. And someone had listened, and that had made all the difference. The music built to its conclusion, a soaring melody that sounded like hope itself. It said that no matter how bad things get, there's always a chance for something better. That kindness exists in the world, that people can surprise you, that you're stronger than you think you are, that tomorrow really can be better than today. Lily played the final chord and let it ring out into the silence. Then she lifted her hands from the keys and looked out at the audience. Through the bright lights, she could see people on their feet applauding. Mr. Antonio was crying again, just like that first night. Rosa was clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. Victoria was beaming with pride. And in that moment, Lily understood something important. Her mother hadn't left her with nothing when she died. She'd left her with music. And music had saved her life. It had given her a way to express the pain she couldn't put into words. It had opened the door to that restaurant on the night when she'd needed it most. It had shown people who she really was beneath the dirty clothes and hungry eyes. It had connected her to people who wanted to help. It had given her a future when she thought she had none. As Lily took her bow and walked off the stage, she knew this was just the beginning. There would be more performances, more challenges, more moments of doubt. Life wouldn't be perfect just because things were better now. She'd still miss her mother. She'd still have hard days. But she also knew she could handle whatever came next, because she'd survived the worst already, and because she wasn't facing the future alone anymore. Sometimes, Lily thought, the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. And sometimes the most beautiful thing you can do is say yes when someone asks. That's what music had taught her. That's what that night at Romano's had shown her. And that's what she'd carry with her for the rest of her life. 2 years had passed since that magical night at Romano's restaurant. Lily was now 14, and her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined when she was that scared. Hungry 12-year-old pressing her face against the glass door. She still lived with Dr. Chen, who had officially adopted her 6 months ago. The adoption papers were framed on Lily's bedroom wall, right next to a photo of her mother. Dr. Chen never tried to replace her mom, but she had become something just as precious. A guardian, a teacher, a friend who understood the language of music that flowed through Lily's veins. The house felt like home now. Real home. Not the temporary kind she'd known in foster care where she'd always been waiting for the other shoe to drop. This was permanent, safe. The music room had become her sanctuary, where she spent hours each day practicing, composing, and sometimes just sitting at the piano talking to her mother's memory. At Riverside Academy, Lily had become something of a legend. Not because of the viral video or the media attention that had followed that night at the restaurant, but because of her music itself. Her teachers said they'd never seen such natural talent combined with such dedication. She practiced when other kids were playing video games. She studied music theory during lunch breaks. She composed pieces in her head while walking to class. But it wasn't just about the music anymore. Lily had discovered something else that filled her heart almost as much as playing piano. She'd started volunteering at the downtown shelter where she used to sleep sometimes when she was on the streets. Every Saturday morning, she'd go there with her guitar and play for the people staying there. At first, the idea had terrified her. Going back to that place, seeing the desperation in people's eyes that she remembered so well from looking in mirrors during her own dark days. But Dr. Chen had encouraged her to try it, and now it was the highlight of her week. The people at the shelter weren't just homeless people to her. They were Tommy, who used to be a construction worker before he got injured and lost his job. They were Grace, a woman with mental illness who sometimes forgot where she was but always remembered every song Lily played. They were Robert, a veteran who'd been living on the streets for 3 years but still carried a photo of his daughter in his wallet. When Lily played for them, something beautiful happened. For those 30 or 40 minutes, the harsh realities of their lives faded into the background. The music created a bubble of peace, a moment where they could remember what it felt like to be human beings deserving of beauty and kindness. Some cried, some sang along, some just closed their eyes and let the music wash over them like a warm bath. Today was special, though. Today marked exactly 2 years since that night at Romano's, and Mr. Antonio had called with an idea. He wanted to host a benefit concert at his restaurant to raise money for the shelter where Lily volunteered. Not just any concert, but one where Lily would be the featured performer. "You bring the magic once," he'd said in his thick accent over the phone. "Maybe you bring it again, but this time we help more people like you helped us that night." Lily had agreed immediately. The concert was scheduled for tonight, and all the proceeds would go to providing meals and beds for people who needed them most. Tickets had sold out within hours. People remembered that viral video, but more than that, they remembered the feeling it had given them. The reminder of what really mattered in life. The restaurant looked different tonight than it had 2 years ago. The tables had been rearranged to create a small performance space near the piano. White flowers decorated every surface. Candles flickered on each table, creating a warm, intimate atmosphere. The same crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, but tonight they seemed to sparkle with extra brightness. In the kitchen, Rosa was preparing a special menu for the evening. All of Lily's favorite dishes, plus some new ones she'd created just for tonight. The smell of garlic and fresh bread filled the air, mixing with the nervous excitement that seemed to buzz through the entire restaurant. Lily stood in front of the mirror in the small office behind the kitchen, adjusting her dress. It was deep blue, the color of the night sky, with tiny silver buttons that caught the light like stars. Dr. Chen had helped her pick it out, saying it made her eyes look like sapphires. Lily didn't care about looking pretty, but she wanted to look respectful, professional, like someone who deserved to be here. "You ready, little star?" Mr. Antonio appeared in the doorway, beaming at her with the same warmth he'd shown that first night. Over the past 2 years, he and Rosa had become like grandparents to her. They remembered her birthday with elaborate cakes. They came to all her school concerts. They worried about her when she was sick and celebrated every small victory in her life. "I think so," Lily said, smoothing down her dress. "What if I mess up? What if I forget the words to the new song?" Mr. Antonio laughed, the kind of laugh that made his whole belly shake. "You think too much, just like before. Your fingers, they know what to do. Your heart, it knows what to say. Trust them both." He was right, of course. Lily had been preparing for weeks, but the truth was, she could play most of these pieces in her sleep. The music lived inside her now, part of her DNA, as natural as breathing. Through the office window, she could see the restaurant filling up with people. Some were the same faces from that night 2 years ago. The businessman who'd given her $20 was there with his whole family. The elderly couple who'd reminded her of their deceased daughter sat at their usual table near the window. Victoria was there, of course, along with Beth and Daniel and Dr. Chen, but there were new faces too. People who'd heard about tonight through word of mouth or social media, families with children, young couples, teenagers who looked like they understood what it meant to struggle. The restaurant was packed, every seat taken, with people standing along the walls. Most importantly, scattered throughout the crowd, Lily could see familiar faces from the shelter. Tommy was there in a clean shirt, looking nervous but proud. Grace sat near the front, her eyes already bright with anticipation. Robert had traded his usual spot on the corner for a chair at a real table, and he kept looking around like he couldn't quite believe he was allowed to be here. Mr. Antonio had insisted that everyone from the shelter eat for free tonight. "They the reason we doing this," he'd said firmly when Victoria had offered to cover the cost. "They are guests of honor." A soft knock on the door interrupted Lily's thoughts. Dr. Chen peeked her head in, carrying a small wrapped box. "I have something for you," she said, coming into the room and closing the door behind her. "I was saving it for your birthday next month, but tonight feels like the right time." Lily took the box with curious hands. It was light, wrapped in silver paper with a small blue bow. She unwrapped it carefully, the way she did everything now, savoring moments instead of rushing through them. Inside was a necklace, simple and elegant, with a small golden music note pendant hanging from a delicate chain. But when Lily looked closer, she saw there was an engraving on the back of the pendant. In tiny letters it read, "For my brave girl, love, Mom." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "How did you—" "I had it made," Dr. Chen said softly. "I've been working with the jeweler for months to get the engraving just right. I wanted you to have something of hers with you tonight. Something to remind you that she's proud of what you've become." With shaking hands, Lily fastened the necklace around her neck. The small weight of it against her chest felt like a hug from her mother. Like a reminder that love doesn't die just because someone does. It lives on in the people who remember, in the music that carries their memory, and the choices we make to honor what they taught us. "Thank you," Lily whispered, hugging Dr. Chen tightly. "For everything. For saving me. For believing in me. For giving me a home." Dr. Chen hugged her back just as tightly. "You saved yourself, sweetheart. You walked through that door 2 years ago and asked for help. That took more courage than most adults ever show in their entire lives. All we did was say yes." A gentle knock on the door interrupted them. It was Rosa, her face glowing with excitement. "It's time, Bambina. They all waiting for you." Lily took a deep breath, touching the music note at her throat one more time. Then she followed Rosa out of the office and toward the dining room where her audience waited. As she walked through the kitchen, past the familiar sights and smells that would always remind her of that first night, Lily thought about how much had changed. 2 years ago, she'd been desperate, hungry, alone. Tonight, she was surrounded by people who loved her, performing to raise money for others who needed help just like she once had. The circle was complete. She'd been saved by music and kindness, and now she was using her music to save others. This was what her mother had meant when she said music tells the truth. Sometimes the truth is sad. Sometimes it's angry. But sometimes, if you're really lucky, the truth is that broken things can be fixed. That lost children can be found. That one moment of courage can change everything. Lily stepped into the dining room, and the conversation gradually died down as people noticed her. She walked slowly toward the piano, her dress rustling softly with each step. The room was completely silent now, filled with anticipation and love and hope. She sat down at the bench, the same bench where she'd sat 2 years ago as a terrified child with nothing left to lose. Now she was here as someone with everything to give. Her fingers found the keys as familiar and comforting as coming home. Tonight she would play for her mother's memory, for Mr. Antonio and Rosa's kindness, for Dr. Chen's love, for the people at the shelter who needed to remember their own worth, for everyone who'd ever felt lost and alone. But most of all, she would play for that scared 12-year-old girl who'd been brave enough to ask for help when she needed it most. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do is save yourself, so you can turn around and help save someone else.